Today on Tech Tuesday, we're going to teach you how to take care of the most important part of your rig, the heart of your rig, the engine. Let's talk about the main parts of an oiling system inside your engine. The main heart of the oiling system is going to be obviously your oil pump. Now your oil pump goes inside your engine no matter what it is, if it's a Ford, a Chevrolet, or whatever. Its job is to pick oil up from the oil pan and pump it throughout the system. That might seem like pretty basic knowledge, but a lot of guys screw this up because they think if I have super high oil pressure that my motor is going to last longer. Well, that's not the case. You need to have an oil pressure that's actually between the certain range that your manufacturer recommends, because if you have a high oil pressure, that means that the pump is basically not pumping the fluid through fast enough. So if you have a high pressure pump or a high volume pump and you have small journals, you're basically blocking that oil from being able to flow through the motor properly, or you have too thick of an oil. You need to drop that down and get it to where it's within the specified range. Same thing if you have low oil pressure, you might need to get a thicker oil, but all that stuff regardless is going to be something that you have to think about whenever you're looking at your system. The one thing that I see a lot of guys do with off-road vehicles is they go to the parts store and they say, by God, I want an oil pressure that's out of this roof. I want something that's high pump or high pressure, and I want a pump that's going to have high volume. And I can tell you that that is a very big mistake, because what happens is the oil inside of your oil pan is sloshing around. And if you have a high volume oil pump, you'll suck that pan dry. Go back and watch my fluid containment video. In that video, I've got this little Tupperware and I've got fluid inside there. And you can see as I'm kind of moving around, that fluid's kind of moving around in all different directions. Well, what happens is, if you've got an oil pan like this right here, picture this the same as what I had in the fluid containment video, and you've got oil sitting right about here, and you start climbing a hill. Well, when you start climbing a hill, this oil pickup tube that's sitting right here, down inside that little hole right there where those baffles are, is now going to have oil moving away from it. And if you have a high volume oil pump, that's going to happen faster. Basically, you're going to suck that pan dry too soon. So stay away from the high volume oil pump. Oil pans are a very overlooked item in the oiling system. A lot of guys just go down, they get a regular oil pan, they slap it on and think they're good to go. A lot of your old school stuff, you got an old school Chevy 350 or a Ford 351, whatever, it doesn't matter. A lot of those pans are just stamped and they're not really baffled for off-road use. If you do have one of those pans, you want to make sure you step it up to something that's got a bunch of baffling. We sell a couple different pans, but our go-to is this Fbody oil pan for an LS engine. And the reason is it's got a very low deck height from here to here, and then also it's got a really nice baffling system inside here. That allows you to get your motor low in the chassis, so you've got a really nice center of gravity, and that keeps the oil down here by the pickup whenever you're at those crazy angles. Another component that I consider essential for an off-road vehicle is an accumulator. An accumulator keeps oil on the engine whenever you're at those crazy angles by injecting oil back into the system whenever you lose oil pressure. Now, let me explain kind of how this thing works. There's a piston on the inside of this thing, and it basically floats back and forth inside of this cylinder. And this end right here with the ball valve is connected to the engine. When you fire up your engine and the oil pump starts pumping, it puts oil pressure inside of the accumulator body and takes this piston and pushes it back. Over here on the end, we've got a little spot right here for air pressure. You put air pressure in this side and it basically pressurizes this cylinder. And so therefore, if you lose oil pressure because you're at a crazy steep angle, then it starts taking that piston and pushes it forward and injects oil back into the engine. And so there's a couple reasons why these things are really, really awesome. One, it keeps your oil pressure where it needs to be. If you lose oil pressure for whatever reason, it starts pushing oil back into the engine and causes your oil level to rise, and then gets back into the pickup and starts pumping pressure back into the oiling system and kind of bounces back and forth constantly to keep your engine with oil pressure. Another thing that's really cool about these is that it gives you extra volume. So this is a 3-quart accumulator, but it it has 3-quart capacity from here to here, and the piston's going to be somewhere in the middle, so it really has about an extra 1.5 quart on top of the system. That gives you extra oil capacity, helps you out with your engine oil cooling, and it's a really cool deal because you've got the extra oil capacity and you've got the safety factor of it that keeps the oil being pressurized into the system. So when you get your accumulator, the very first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that the piston that's inside here is all the way down at this end. So you need to open up the valve. Once you have the valve open, then you can pressurize the cylinder. It's going to take the piston and it's going to push it all the way back over to here. We use 60 psi to set the piston. Once the piston is set, then you bleed off the pressure and you're going to drop it down to about 7 psi. Now 7 psi is what we found in the industry to be a very good pressure for the amount of time it takes for the oil to inject and also the amount of volume you get whenever you have that oil in this accumulator. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to leave this open. You're going to fire up your motor with a hose that's connected from the accumulator to the engine, and you're going to see this gauge increase to the same pressure as what the oil pressure is on your vehicle. Once that's happened, you can close the valve, and when you close the valve, it basically traps the oil inside the system, and then you can check your oil level accordingly and make sure that you're at the right level. Once you open up this valve, it takes the oil contents and pushes it back into the oil pan, and then the system is ready to be driven normally. You don't have to worry about opening this and closing it every time. The only time you have to worry about opening and closing this is if you're going to check your oil level. Again, super simple. Fire up the buggy, let everything equalize, close this, turn off the buggy, check your oil level. Get your oil level where it's supposed to be. Then open this, fire up the buggy, and drive it as normal. And then if you're ever in a situation wherever the system loses pressure, it'll start injecting oil back in. So how do we make the connection at the oil pan itself? Now, every vehicle is a little bit different. We're going to talk specifically about LS because it's the most popular engine in the sport that we're in. But if you have an old school Ford, an old school Chevrolet, it's very similar to the process that we're about to show you. However, it does have a couple different fittings that are a little bit different than what we're showing you. Now, so right here, we've got this really nice billet block. This billet block has a nice fitting on the top, and it goes in place of the factory oil cooler lines that are right here. If you buy one of these Fbody oil pans, or any oil pan for that matter, they generally have just a cap that sits over the top of 2 holes that are sitting right here. Now, if you take those 2 screws out, pull off that, you're basically going to bolt this on right here on the side, and then there's a fitting that comes off the top. That fitting literally just goes straight over to that valve. You can mount this anywhere. We've got a mounting kit for it. You can put it anywhere on the vehicle that you want to. You don't have to worry about it being high or low or anything like that. And anytime you lose oil pressure, it's going to inject oil directly back into those 2 ports simultaneously, allowing the oil to increase its volume inside the pan, and also it puts pressure onto the oil journals inside the engine. So the main portions of the engine oiling system are going to be your oil pan. You got to make sure that you have baffles inside your oil pan, and make sure that the oil pan is built for this type of off-roading where the oil is not just going to slosh around and escape its way out. Next thing is your oil pump. You want to make sure that your oil pump is not a high volume pump. You want to make sure that your oil pressure is within the range that it's supposed to be. Too high is a problem, too low is a problem. You don't want extra oil pressure, and you don't want a high volume pump. The next thing is going to be your accumulator. I highly suggest getting an accumulator for your system. This has the ability to save the most important part of your rock bouncer, your engine. And I'll tell you what, if you have an accumulator, you're not invincible. These things do work really well. Like if you flip over and land back on your tires, you're good to go. If you're at a crazy angle, you're good to go. But if you're all the way upside down, you've got about 13 seconds to get this thing flipped back over or shut her down. Ask me how I know. And if you need any of these parts, check out bustedknuckleoffroad.com. We have everything in stock and ready to ship to your door. Look back, watch the coolant, or oh crap, throughout the entire vehicle, obviously. Not the entire vehicle, but just the motor. Another main component that I consider essential. Oil pans are a very necessary. It usually goes to like a external cooler. I kind of derailed there for a second. Here, there's a piston, and that piston floats.
Does it matter that the logo's upside down?
Oh, shoot. Okay. Into the oil pan, dude. I'm sweating my balls off. The oil pickup and holds. Oh man, dude, I'm dying.